And hi everybody, this is Clay Stoldt, and I'm making a presentation on ethics in sport marketing. Glad you could tune in for the presentation. Here's an overview of the direction we're going to go with this presentation. The first thing we'll do is just talk about a few sport marketing ethics related headlines that we've seen in recent years. From there we'll move to a conceptual framework for understanding ethical decision making in a sport marketing setting, and that will provide a framework for us to use as we think about some of the many ethical issues that currently exist in sport marketing. Some of those are long-standing issues, and as we'll discuss, you will also see that some of those are very current and continue to be relevant for the industry today. In taking a look at some of the headlines of prominent sport marketing ethics related issues that we've seen in the field over the last 10 to 20 years. Certainly one that has been in the headlines. At times it's been a hotter issue than others, but for the organization it has clearly been an issue in which it has struggled on a long-term basis, has been the public perception of Nike's use of subcontractors overseas who are conducting Nike-related operations in harsh work environments that critics would say exploit employees and in fact at times abuse employees. And again, this is a long-standing issue that Nike has faced for more than 20 years now, and it has ebbed and flowed, but Nike continues to have its critics, as do other sporting goods manufacturers who utilize overseas labor subcontractors, but Nike tends to be the one that gets the brunt of the criticism because of its position as a marketing leader. For many years, the championship series in NASCAR was known as the Winston Cup Series, and this was an issue that also was a debated issue as to the ethical dimensions of that, as Winston, a tobacco-related organization, and of course the tobacco industry, long perceived to be one that promoted and sold unhealthy products to the general public. And so by virtue of NASCAR having a prominent title sponsor from that industry, NASCAR was criticized for many years until the Winston naming rights deal elapsed. And then from the perspective of sport and entertainment, a number of years ago there was of course the controversy at the halftime of the Super Bowl in which Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson were performing together, and there was the prominent wardrobe malfunction problem which occurred, which within the span of the game's broadcast was something that was actually just a very brief incident, but it was certainly noticed. It certainly created national headlines. There was a controversy that surrounded the issue, and it fundamentally changed the way the National Football League has marketed the related entertainment elements of the Super Bowl, as in recent years it has been very mindful to either one, utilize performers who are less likely to push the envelope and engage in controversial behavior, or to have very strict restrictions within the contracts of those performers. So a controversy that forced changes on arguably the single strongest sport property in the United States. Those are three kind of historical headlines. And as we move into the latter part of the presentation today, we'll take a look at some other issues that continue to be highly relevant in the field and continue to be a subject of at least attention, if not debate. But before we move on to taking a look at those issues, it's important for us to have a framework for analyzing sport marketing related ethical issues. And the following model is one that is in the literature as a business ethics model specifically applied in some instances to marketing decisions. And I think it's one that's helpful for our discussions in addition to the other models that you likely have become familiar with as a result of this class. This is a framework for understanding organizational, ethical decision making, and it's a strong model in the sense that it characterizes many of the key elements that are in play when ethics-related decisions are made within a particular organizational structure. And so let's spend a few minutes talking about the key elements within this model, and then we'll talk about some of the implications of that model for organizational and specifically marketing decision making. First element in the model that we want to highlight is this element of stakeholder interest and concerns, because ethical decisions within organizations are never made within a vacuum. There are always various internal and external stakeholder interest and concerns that may impact the decision. And organizations have a variety of stakeholders. The precise list of stakeholders will vary some from organization to organization. A college athletics department will have a slightly different list of stakeholders than perhaps a local recreation commission. But most have stakeholders such as employees as an internal stakeholder group, and customers or at least supporters as an external stakeholder group. There may be regulators who are involved as an external stakeholder group, and if it is a for-profit venture, you may also have shareholders or, in other settings, owners who are invested in that organization with the intent of making money that are also key stakeholders that have influence on the process as depicted in this model. A second key element, as you'll see up at the top of the model, are the individual factors, the moral philosophies and values of the individuals within the organization. And while, as we will see, organizational factors are different and organizational decision-making is not just influenced by individual factors, the individual factors cannot be discounted because the individuals within those organizations will bring their personal moral philosophies, and those may range, as you probably have already been discussing within this class, from consequentialist to non-consequentialist philosophies. And different individuals within the organization will also be at different levels in terms of their moral development, and that is likely another framework that you have spent some time discussing within the course of this class. So those individual factors are not going to be homogeneous. Different people within the organization are going to have different outlooks in terms of the values that they embrace and the moral philosophies to which they hold, but they are relevant when it comes to ethical decision making. At the bottom of the model you see organizational factors, which also come into play, and those organizational factors are important, and they are conveyed through the organization's unique culture. And different organizations have different values, different norms, and also are confronted with different opportunities. And those of us who have had the opportunity to work with maybe at least a small variety of organizations within our professional career, we can relate to the fact that the organizational culture within those organizations probably varies from one place to another. One of the related organizational culture philosophies that relevant to the sport management program at Wichita State, for instance, is that our mission statement within the Department of Sport Management notes that we are not only interested in developing capable and competent sport management professionals, but ethical ones as well. That should have impact for our organizational culture and the values and norms within our department and our larger institution. So as you can see by the arrows in the model that both feed into the middle elements, which are the ethical issue intensity and the ethical decision, those are all influenced by both the external and internal stakeholder interest, the organizational factors as conveyed through the organizational culture, and then the individual factors as well. Next key item in the model has to do with ethical issue intensity. And that's an important thing to take into account because different ethics-related issues sometimes are more intense than others. And the level of intensity sometimes does have a factor into the decision that may ultimately be made. And again, this is something that as we move into our discussion of some of the key issues in sport marketing, you will see that is the case. Some issues are more intense than others. Then there is the ethical decision, which is impacted by the intensity of the issue, the individual factors, and the organizational factors. And whenever ethical decisions are made, you see on the far right side of the model, there are outcomes that are achieved as a result of that decision, positive or negative or both. And as those outcomes are evaluated, it has implications for both the individuals within the organization itself, and the organization stakeholders. So that's the model for understanding ethical decision making within an organization. Now there are a number of implications of that model, and we'll take a look at those implications on the next couple of slides. First implication, as discussed, is that organizational ethics are not necessarily the same as personal ethics. Now, one would think and one would expect that for an individual to be a committed, successful member of an organization, that there may likely, probably would be some overlap in terms of the individual's ethical philosophies and the values and the ethical standards within the organization. But they aren't always the same. And that's an important distinction to remember, because sometimes we find that individuals are conflicted when they are a part of an organization. A second implication of the model is because of the importance of stakeholder concerns in ethical decision making, that it is recommended that organizations have a balanced stakeholder orientation. Now, in any given situation, and particularly when it relates to an ethical decision, frankly, the values of some stakeholders take priority over the values of others. That said, a single stakeholder group, if an organization is to prioritize a single stakeholder group at the expense of all others in most every setting, that can be a very dangerous situation. And in fact, that's something on a large scale that we've seen with some of the large economic problems that the U.S. and in fact the world have wrestled with in recent years, as the values of those making money as a result of organizational operations has seemed to trump all others when it comes to organizational decision making. Some level of balance seems to be required. Third key implication of the ethics model is that organizational climate is a significant factor when it comes to ethical decision making within organizations. And in fact, the research would indicate that probably if you were to put the organizational factors and individual factors on a scale, that the organizational factors would weigh more heavily, generally speaking, when it comes to organizational decision making, because sometimes the context through which the decision is perceived, looks different within the framework of an organization, and again, different individuals, different philosophies coming together under the organizational umbrella. Not everybody is always going to be on the same page, and so decisions that are made at the organizational level may be as a result of competing values or compromising values or collaborative decision makings. Fourth implication of the ethics model is that the opportunities to engage in misconduct, ethical misconduct within the organization, tend to relate to the immediate job context. Farrell, in the article in which this model is presented and discussed, notes that, and granted this is painting with a broad stroke and is maybe just a rule of thumb, is that within any particular organizational setting, 10% of the members of that organization will engage in unethical behavior, take advantage of an opportunity if they perceive the benefits to be high enough and the risk to be low enough. Another 40% of the individuals within that organization will, quote, go along with whatever the work group's decisions and philosophy is, even if they may not be in perfect alignment with their own individual philosophies. Another 40% within the organization will attempt to follow the standards and the policies of the organization at all cost, and will find that those things tend to be in alignment with their own personal philosophies. They may even attempt to influence organizational policies on some instances. And then the 10% at the other extreme are those individuals within the organization who will adhere to their own personal moral values and ethical code of conduct relating to their to the rights of others, to the duties that they have within the organization, and so forth. So there is a continuum of dispositions to organizational decision making within any given setting, and paying attention to the opportunities for misconduct and the related benefits and consequences of misconduct is an important step in the process. Two more implications before we move on to our discussion of ethical issues in the field. The fifth is that the rewards for performance goals and organizational culture are the most important factors in ethical decision making. In other words, the reward system that is in place for meeting performance goals needs to be such that it encourages accomplishment and achievement, but not to the extent that it encourages ethical misconduct in order to achieve various accomplishments. And that structure needs to be conveyed through the organization's culture so that ethics and the organization's values are conveyed and utilized when it comes to organizational decision making. Sixth implication is a very nice quote which I think kind of sums up the takeaway from the article, which is this: ethical leaders are competent managers who take a holistic view of the firm's ethical culture. And so that's the recommended direction when it comes to organizational decision making. So with that said, let's take a look at some of the ethical issues that are commonly in play within the field of sport marketing. And the identification of these issues generally comes from a sport marketing textbook written by Sam Fullerton. And they are organized by different dimensions within the marketing process. And so the first set of issues has to deal with target marketing issues. And two that are particularly prominent in sport has to do with exclusionary membership policies, and then second, targeting children. Let's talk about the first one, exclusionary membership policies. This tends to be an ethical issue that, while it certainly is not limited to the golf sector of the industry, does tend to be one that comes up repeatedly within golf, because a number of golf clubs have long-standing histories of discrimination in some form or another. while overt racial and ethnic discrimination is not something that you often find within the field anymore. If we were to break down the membership demographics at many of the most prestigious golf and country clubs, we would find that there probably is not a great level of diversity within the club membership rolls. But beyond that, there continue to be, at least in some settings, overt exclusionary policies that are in place as it relates to gender in some settings. And the photo on the slide is from Augusta, where the Masters is held each year, and this tends to be an issue that sometimes comes up around the Masters golf tournament. It was a particularly intense ethical issue a number of years ago, as Augusta was the subject of protest from women's groups, which were concerned about the fact that the club had no female members. Now, that's not to say that women cannot play on the golf course. They can do so as long as they are a guest of a member. But as of the recording of this particular lecture, there are and have been no female members at Augusta. Again, as of the recording of this lecture, though, this is an issue that is back in the news, because as the 2012 Masters approached, the tournament had sold corporate sponsorship and advertising to 3 major sponsors for the tournament, who would receive commercial time during the one of the great things about the Masters on television is that there's limited commercial time, only 4 minutes per hour. So those sponsors really have a lot of clout because there's not much clutter in the broadcast. Well, as part of the agreement with those sponsors, one of the clauses of that agreement is that the CEO of those 3 organizations automatically receive memberships at Augusta if they would like them. And IBM, one of the 3 sponsors for this year's tournament, within the last few months, has named a woman to its CEO position. And although she is not an avid golfer, she is a golfer. And so as the 2012 tournament approaches, the question is, will she become the first female member at Augusta? So exclusionary membership policies, one of the target marketing related issues. A second one is the marketing of sport that is targeted specifically to children, and then sometimes the marketing of products through sport to children. And while the reality is that in a highly competitive environment, it behooves many organizations to establish product and brand preferences with children, because they tend to establish preferences for life. Anytime there is a discussion of marketing practices targeted directly at children, it is a sensitive topic, because kids tend to be so impressionable, and there is always the criticism that it is exploiting kids in some way or another. And so while it may not by definition be unethical to market to children, in a sports setting it is fair to ask the question about the ethical dimensions of at least marketing some sport products and brands to children. For instance, there's been research done about, and granted we're moving into the realm of kind of a pseudo sport here, but the effects of professional wrestling being marketed to children, and what those effects are as observed by teachers and school administrators. Clearly, if that marketing is teaching violence and sexism as part of the core element of the wrestling product, there are ethical issues associated with that. There may be ethical issues associated with marketing a sport such as football to children, whereas we are more and more becoming attuned to the long-term health effects of playing that particular sport, the question becomes just how ethical is it to market that sport to children, for which we know there are commonly long-term health disadvantages that may be associated with it. So the targeting of some sports to children is an ethical issue, and then the marketing of other products through sport to children is also a key issue. And one of the examples of this that we commonly see today is the marketing of fast food through sport. And I think we probably all understand that there are certainly maybe some time and in some instances, I guess, personal enjoyment that's associated with knocking down fast food, but there are also health consequences to that. And to the extent that fast food enterprises are able to market their brand to children, by virtue of their sponsorship of sport properties, that can sometimes be an ethically sensitive issue. So those are two ethics issues related to target marketing. Next, let's move on to talking about product-related issues. And we have four in particular here that are worthy of commentary. The first is the use of sexuality to sell sports. And commonly, I think that we could identify two different ways in which this is done, in which sexuality is used as a product extension associated with spirit squads or dance teams in particular, and it tends to be probably more egregious, for lack of a better term, at the professional level than at the collegiate or the scholastic level. But the whole notion of the spirit squad in whatever outfits they may be wearing, and the dance routines that they may do, some of which may be suggestive in some ways or another. The question of, is that really an ethical way to enhance the marketing of sport products and services? And then there's the issue of the way female athletes are presented and marketed themselves. And there's a range of ethics-related issues pertaining to this particular aspect of the topic, ranging from controversy that may surround someone like Danica Patrick, who has been very effective in marketing her own personal brand and is not shy about using her sexuality as a tool to appeal to a large target market, to sports such as beach volleyball, where the rules have required participants to either compete wearing bikinis or bodysuits, which again may enable the sport to use sexuality as a tool to advance its appeal. Again, as this lecture is being recorded, we are looking ahead to the 2012 Summer Olympic Games in London, and this issue of uniforms for beach volleyball players has become prominent once again, as there is anticipation of the games. There is a broadening of the rules for uniforms, so that athletes competing in that sport, at least who would like to do so, may wear uniforms that allow them to have more of their bodies covered than they would in a bikini, or maybe something that would be more modest than a bodysuit. And the purpose for that rule change is to expand the appeal of the sport to cultures that are more conservative when it comes to attire and what would be appropriate for females to wear in competition. So again, that notion of uniforms and sexuality, and the rule change is in tune with cultural sensitivities, and yet there are commentators that are noting that it could indeed hurt the sport in terms of its broad appeal, because the thinking is that the sexuality that's been used to sell that sport has worked to the sport's advantage. That's one product-related issue. Another one has to do with the scheduling of sport events specifically for television. And we commonly see that in a couple of ways. In some instances, it is discussion regarding how appropriate it is to schedule intercollegiate and in some instances interscholastic sport contest at odd times, simply for the purpose of being able to be carried on television. In some instances, that means that events are played and broadcast at times in which school is not even in session, and so the student body is not even there and able to participate. In other instances, it may mean that teams are required to adhere to travel schedules, which may be running counter to the academic well-being of the student athletes who are involved. But the influence of television and just the ethical dimensions of something like having perhaps a basketball game that might be scheduled for 10 or 10:30 at night, tip-off simply to accommodate television. There are ethical dimensions to that question. There are also ethical dimensions to rescheduling sport contests, such as in the NFL season, late in the season, the NBC Sunday Night Football broadcast has the right to select games for rescheduling during that Sunday night slot so that they get the best game of the week for that prime time television coverage. And while that may make sense from a television viewership standpoint, and NBC was able to successfully negotiate that in its contract, there are implications for fans, many of whom travel large distances to attend NFL games. And so the question becomes, if you have season ticket holders who may live hours away who are driving in and out of the community that same day for the game, how ethical is it to treat those customers in such a way that on a week's notice they find that their game maybe has gone from a 12 noon kickoff in their market to one that would be kicking off at 7:30 at night for Sunday night football? Then there's the product-related issue of unwholesome products being sold through sport platforms. We touched on this a little bit as it might relate to marketing fast foods to kids, but beyond that, whether it's products being marketed to children or adults, there are products sold through sport platforms which at least have some degree of public criticism associated with them. Certainly alcohol as a sponsor that is highly involved in sports is something that has drawn criticism because of the common abuse of alcohol, particularly as it relates to college campuses, where alcoholism among students is a huge problem, and yet college athletic departments tap into sponsorship money from alcoholic beverage manufacturers and distributors, and so the athletic departments are benefiting financially from that relationship in a setting in which the student services providers are working very hard to combat alcohol-related issues on campus. And you can even extend that back to tobacco-related products, and we noted the Winston Cup series early on in the lecture, and even the propriety of products like some of the prescription medications that are sold through sport sponsorships or advertising in sport broadcast, such as erectile dysfunction drugs, and the propriety of that, particularly in sports programming, which is being marketed as family programming. And if you have been a part of a family or have been in the situation such as I have a number of years ago, in which a commercial for an ED drug was aired during a sports broadcast, and then you have a child asking you about the nature of that drug and what it's supposed to do, you understand some of the discomfort that may be present when it comes to the airing of those commercials. And then a final product-related issue, something that we've already touched on again, is the sweatshop production issue. And again, that is one that is ongoing. Nike and a number of other sporting goods manufacturers have taken significant steps in recent years to minimize abuses and to enhance working conditions for laborers overseas who may be working under subcontractors. In some instances, Nike has even severed relationships with subcontractors that have been repeated violators of the organization's labor code of conduct. But they continue to use overseas manufacturers. They continue to receive criticism for some of the working conditions in those plants. And a documentary that was done a number of years ago notes the importance of that to the sporting good manufacturing industry, particularly shoe manufacturers, who indicate that if they were to simply limit their manufacturing operations to the United States, that the cost of your typical sports shoe would at least double, if not triple. So those are 4 related product-related issues. Let's take a look at a couple of distribution-related issues in sport marketing. First has to do with franchise mobility and the fact that we commonly see sport franchises move from market to market simply based on where they are able to get the sweetest stadium deal or tap into the deepest target market in terms of revenue potential. And you have the photograph on the slide here of the Oklahoma City Thunder, an organization which I'm personally fond of, a big Thunder fan here, but also recognize that that organization is in Oklahoma City, and it came from Seattle, where they were formerly known as the Supersonics, and that move came at great pain to many sports fans within the city of Seattle and the surrounding areas, and in fact serious economic consequences for that community as it lost a major level sport franchise. And beyond the economic impact, there are also civic and psychological impacts that are associated with having premier level sport organizations. So as great as the Thunder has been for Oklahoma City economically and psychologically, there have been consequences on the other end of that with Seattle. And not just picking on this particular franchise, there are numerous instances of organizations relocating. And in fact, there's discussion right now about what will happen in the Los Angeles market, as it one of the top markets in the nation does not currently have an NFL team. They do seem to have a stadium deal in place that would likely attract a franchise. The NFL, at the recording of this particular lecture, has announced no plans for expansion franchises, and so the question becomes which team within the league, which franchise within the league is most likely to relocate. And there has been speculation that perhaps the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team in a much smaller market, lower revenue potential, might be a candidate. But again, as of the recording of this lecture, it would seem that the most buzz surrounds the St. Louis Rams, who are currently having stadium renegotiation issues in St. Louis, that within the next couple of years that the Rams might make a move to Los Angeles, which is somewhat ironic because the Rams came to St. Louis relocating from Los Angeles in the first place. So franchise mobility is an ethical issue, as are publicly funded venues. And the ethical dimensions of this particular issue has to do with fairness, and the fact that when venues, when sport facilities are publicly funded, that the burden of that funding typically rests on all taxpayers, and the question of fairness is of those taxpayers that may be paying an extra cent of sales tax to build or renovate a sport and entertainment facility. How fair is that when only a percentage of the population will ever attend an event, sport or otherwise, within that facility? So the whole notion of fairness is in place, as well as the issue of Ethically, what does it say about our community values that we are willing to invest heavily in sport and entertainment at times in which our public education systems are struggling, at times in which law enforcement and other emergency services tend to be struggling, and so the whole notion of values and just what is really important to the community comes into play when public funding is directed toward sport entertainment ventures. On the other side of that, there are some instances in which sport properties and particularly premier facilities would not exist within communities without public funding. The economic model would be very difficult without that funding. And the reality is that for many organizations, and now we're back to talking about the example of the Thunder and formerly the Supersonics, is that if you can't get the funding support in one market, there's somebody else out there that will offer it, and so what you wind up doing is sacrificing a major sport property that may have long-standing ties to the community if the community isn't willing to pony up with the funds. Next issue has to do with pricing issues in sport marketing, and there's three that we want to highlight. And the first has to do with just ticket prices in general, which have increased quite a bit in recent years, far outpacing the cost of living. And one of the ways that those ticket prices are tracked and measured is through something called the Fan Cost Index. This may be a term that you're familiar with as a result of some of your other sport marketing classes. If not, it is a calculation that is done by Team Marketing Report on an ongoing basis, where they calculate the average price to see major professional sport entities. How much would it cost typically for a family of four to buy tickets, concessions, and souvenirs at one of those games? And again, this is something that is created by a Team Marketing Report and reported through many other avenues in terms of both the business press and the popular press. And as we're taking a look here at this particular graphic, this is a graphic that was developed to conceptualize the data reported from the Fan Cost Index in Major League Baseball just a couple of years ago. I think this is 2009 that we are looking at. But what we're seeing here is the graph depicts the relationship between Fan Cost Index and winning percentage. But beyond that, what you see is you get a sense of the range of costs that are involved. And again, these are the costs that would, on average, be involved in taking a family of four simply to one baseball game with these particular franchises. And at the top of the scale, no surprise, the New York Yankees. They're the big money spenders. They are the big money organization overall in Major League Baseball. Average cost, fan cost index here, is $411 to take a family to a single New York Yankees game. Let's move to another team on the scale which has a much lower winning percentage and lower cost as well. The Kansas City Royals. If the Yankees are a team that have historically performed at a high level, at least over the last 20 years, the Royals have been on the other end of the spectrum. And as you see, their average winning percentage, just 41%. But look at the fan cost index, even for going to a Royals game, $162 to go to a Royals game for a family of four. That is quite expensive. And clearly, teams would not price their tickets, concessions, and souvenirs at that level if they did not feel that the law of supply and demand was in place and that they could sell at that price. And yet, on the other hand, there have been questions asked in terms of the ethical dimensions of those pricing decisions and to what degree the common average fan is being priced out of the market because those prices are so high. Team ticket scalping is another pricing related issue where we have seen in recent years that both professional and college level teams are seeing the prices that fans are getting in the secondary ticket sales market, and they are either establishing their own in-house operation or they are engaging in partnerships with StubHub or Ticketmaster so that they have relationships in place for the resale of their tickets. And really what winds up happening is that teams who for years were vocal critics of scalping and the ethical dimensions of that practice now find themselves in the same business, as they typically take a cut of whatever the sales price is through that secondary market that they have established relationships. So real interesting dynamic in place there when it comes to ticket scalping through secondary systems. And then there's the issue of PSLs. And PSLs, that term can be used in two ways. The first is personal seat licenses, which are fees that fans pay simply for the right to then purchase tickets in a given location. And personal seat licenses are renewed on an annual basis. And then there's also the PSL that is the permanent seat license, which is a larger payment that in some instances fans will put down in order to have the rights to purchase tickets to sit in a particular seat or seats over a period of time, maybe 10 to even 15 years. And the ethical issue associated with PSLs again is just the ethic issues of leveraging huge amounts of money from fans over and above the cost of the ticket prices themselves. And whether that is the right thing to do or not, certainly it is a solid tactic from the perspective of the organization that's looking to leverage maximum revenue. The question of fairness and simply what is right and what may not be is the ethics related issue that goes with it. Finally, and last slide, 3 promotional issues related to sport marketing. The first has to do with the over-commercialization of sport. At least that is what sport is sometimes accused of. And we see that in a variety of settings. Again, as this lecture is being recorded, we are in the midst of the March Madness tournament. And interesting how many viewers of those games are making comments on how long the commercial breaks are that play during every media timeout. Beyond that, over-commercialization is something that has been commonly complained about within the industry. Sometimes the Olympics are particular targets for this type of criticism because they position themselves as this global event bringing the world together under the umbrella of sport, promoting peace and goodwill among people, and yet there are sponsorships involved in all aspects of the games. It's a big revenue producer. And the question has been whether it is appropriate to have the Olympics commercialized at the levels they are. In fact, going back a few years when Atlanta hosted the '96 Summer Games, one prominent media commentator looked at all of the sponsorship in play during those games and described Atlanta as one giant flea market. So over-commercialization is a promotion-related issue. Another one is the use of athletes as product endorsers. And there's a long-standing history here. Actually, I think those who may be history of sport buffs will know that the association of prominent athletes with products may go back as far as the Roman Empire, if not earlier than that. but certainly it is common in modern day American sport, global sport as well, to use athletes as product endorsers. And that can be controversial in and of itself from several reasons. One reason would be that sometimes those endorsers are used to endorse products that again are being marketed to kids, and the whole sensitivity of marketing products, particularly those that may not be viewed as good and healthy for kids, and whether it is fair to use heroes to market those same products to kids is an interesting question to debate. The second one has to do with the degree to which the athletes that are endorsing the products really are supporting the product, or really are they just signing on for another paycheck. And Charles Barkley is a highly popular and enjoyable sports figure, enjoys high levels of popularity in many circles. And Barkley is a prominent endorser, including an endorser of Weight Watchers, and as a microphone that he did not realize was on early in the 2011-12 NBA season caught him making some disparaging comments about the very company for which he had signed an endorsement deal would indicate. Sometimes those endorsements may not be as genuine as the endorsers and, in fact, the companies would have us believe. The last one, and we'll offer just a few comments about it because maybe it is the single most commonly discussed ethical issue in sport marketing, is the notion of ambush marketing. For those who may not have had a sport marketing class yet, what ambush marketing is marketing strategies that an organization will use to imply an official relationship with a sport property where it does not really exist. And what the purpose of ambush marketing is to take advantage of the popularity of a athlete or a sport property without having to pay the money that's involved in establishing a sponsorship or endorsement deal with that property. And ambush marketing is something that sport organizations complain about. They attempt to defend themselves from and their corporate partners. Certainly the corporate partners who are being ambushed complain about it. And a great example of that from within the framework of the Olympics is in the fast food category, where McDonald's is an official Olympics partner, but public surveys that have been done asking folks to recall who the fast food category sponsor for the Olympics is, many of them cite Subway. And the reason for that is because Subway for a number of years has been engaged in a highly effective ambush marketing campaign. Here's an example of a commercial.
Phelps fuels up with the mega-tasty Subway turkey melt, a protein-packed powerhouse on freshly baked bread, so he can get to where the action is this winter. Subway, eat fresh.
A great example of ambush marketing by Subway, who does have an official relationship with Michael Phelps. They have signed him as a product endorser, but they do not have sponsorships with the IOC or the organizing committees in the cities that are hosting either the Winter or Summer Olympic Games. And so in the commercial, what you saw was Michael Phelps swimming north towards Canada, where Vancouver was the host of the 2010 Winter Olympic Games. And so the implied relationship there is that Subway is supported by premier Olympians like Michael Phelps, and again, that's an official sponsorship or endorsement deal, but they implied that relationship with Vancouver, and you saw the snowy mountains, and so it's a very subtly implied, or I guess in some instances not so subtly implied, relationship which exists there. And Subway has been extremely successful in its ambush campaign in that regard. I find this to be a really interesting issue, and I think you'll find variance in opinion within the industry as to the ethical propriety of various ambush marketing practices. I have been at conferences where ambush marketers are decried as among the lowest forms of life on the planet, and I have also been in professional settings in which ambush marketers are credited with being creative and finding unique ways to gain the most promotional value with the least amount of cost. But it certainly is a practice that is relevant to sport managers, because if you are associated with a particular sport property, the prevention of ambush marketing so that you're protecting your partners and your sponsors is a key consideration, not only for the sake of those partners, but for the sake of your own organization, because the value of your own sponsorships is going to be dictated by the degree to which folks feel like it is exclusive and that there are unique benefits that are associated with that. So, with having run through that list, again, we will recap by saying that what we've done through the course of this lecture is take a look at some headlines of ethics-related sport marketing issues that have been particularly prominent in the headlines over the last 10 to 15 years. We've taken a look at a framework for ethical decision-making within the organizational context and the key considerations and key implications of that model. And then we've taken a look at the issues within the field which tend to be the hot-button issues when it comes to ethics-related issues in sport marketing. Hope this has been a beneficial presentation for you. Thanks for your time, and best of luck to all.